The pretty pictures of high romanticism eventually invite their opposite. In Charles Baudelaire, the French poet, you get the principles of romanticism pushed to a further extent. The idea of sensuality, of emotional resonance, of art for art's sake. All of this just goes to the next logical step with Baudelaire. It's all inherent in Wordsworth and Keats and Shelley and Byron and Coleridge and all those guys. But it stays within certain polite limits. Coleridge less so, but it stays within a certain decorum, let's say. But if you admit that emotionalism is good, that emotion is authentic, emotion is genuine, emotion is our animal nature expressing itself, and all of that is good, it doesn't take long to say, well, terror is an emotion, revulsion is an emotion, lust, hatred, violence, these are all emotions. And are we just going to focus on the pretty, the happy emotions, or are we going to open our arms to embrace all of them? That's Baudelaire. He dares to go where few poets had gone before him. And the results. The results can be visceral. They can be offensive to many. He pushes boundaries. He pushes buttons. He is trying to create a sense of vibrancy within poetry that the pretty pictures couldn't quite bring to him. Plus, he was trying to use it to reflect something a little bit more of what he knew. He was very much a child of Paris. He was, by the time he wrote his first significant work of poetry, he was 36 years old. So he had lived for a little while, and he had run away as a teenager. So he had been more or less on his own, although not really financially independent for a while. He has a kind of a shady past, but he had been experiencing life in the underbelly of Paris. He was a bohemian of sorts. He liked to, if he would get a little money from, he had an inheritance from his father who died very young. He would get a little money. He would spend it on these somewhat garish clothes. He liked to go out and buy something a little arch. He was a bohemian. He would wear like these ridiculous clothes that were inordinately fancy, I guess you could say. But for a good time, there was always lots of prostitutes and alcohol and at times drugs, it seems. The details of his life, again, but they are kind of lurid. So this was his milieu. It was a very urban milieu. It was a very underbelly milieu, very bohemian milieu. It was not the polite lake country of Northwest England. It was less inspiring vistas and more grimy streets. The reality that he wanted to see reflected was his reality. And that's kind of the point. What he was importing into Romanticism, the Romantic spirit, was essentially realism. In a way, he wanted his poetry to reflect the world that he saw, and what he saw was perhaps not very polite. Excuse me. So In 1857, he comes out with Fleurs de Mal and the Flowers of Evil. And in that you can see, it's a great title, but you can see immediately flowers good, evil bad. You can't separate them. Baudelaire does not try to separate them. He doesn't just focus on the flowers and poo-poo the evil. He embraces the complexity and the contradictions of both. You cannot separate one from the other. This is realism. This is not idealism. And so much of what he wrote in that book focuses on that. It is indisseverable. Good and evil are one. So, Fleurs de Mal comes out. He is 36 years old at this point, I believe. He, like I said, he's had kind of a dissolute life. He would be dead inside of, I think, 10 years at this point. He wrote more after this. He wrote Paris Spleen, where he experiments with prose poetry, which is very radical for its time. But in all of it, he is pushing the. He does a lot of criticism. He is responsible for making Edgar Allan Poe the huge icon of artistry that he is in France. He's largely responsible for that because of a review that he wrote where he said, "Okay, this is good," and he imports that kind of Gothic mentality into mainstream literature, let's say, mainstream belles lettres. The crux of his work does come in Fleurs de Mal, and everything is laid out there, and it is fun to just open up and go through. From the beginning, it has a little preface, a little foreword in prose or in poetry, in verse. Au lecteur, to the reader, where he directly addresses the reader, and it is a cold slap to anybody who might be, a polite upper crust member of society who's just going to take this book off the shelf and lean back in a comfortable chair by a fire and look at all these sumptuous surroundings around in their library, and I'm a wealthy man, but I'm a serious patron of the arts, so I want to feel good about myself by reading some poetry. And you open up, and it's a little ripe. It's a little overripe. It is challenging. It celebrates everything that polite society tends to shun. And that antisocial impetus is Baudelaire through and through. So, Au lecteur, he just makes it a laundry list of the ugly side of life. Infatuation, sadism, lust, avarice possess our souls and drain the body's force. We spoon feed our adorable remorse like whores and beggars nourishing their lice. There's that is not pretty poetry. That is not pretty. Our sins are mulish, our confessions lies. We play to the grandstand with our promises. We pray for tears to wash our filthiness, importantly pissing hogwash through our styes. And one stanza after the other gets in the reader's face. One stanza after the other throws out all of the dreck of modern life. Modern urban life, the filth, the noise, the stink, everything, sensory overload, using all of these coarse terms, this these ugly words, these prosaic words that poets would never use before. That these were considered, oh, these were just, this is not a proper poetic vocabulary. So they were shunned. Baudelaire says, nope, I'm going to take them, I'm going to use them. This can be poetry because they are real, they are common, everybody sees them, everybody knows them, they are beautiful in themselves. Because who's to say they're not? He's a rebel. He's pushing boundaries. He's breaking down barriers. He's doing all of this stuff that is uncomfortable for polite society. Significantly, however, in all of this, you can see, if you look at the original meter, if you look at the original language, it is all very, very regular. It is all within the tight confines of, it is very specifically and exactingly rhymed. It is very specifically and exactingly metered. Everything fits within a very snug and comfortable form. And yet you have this wild profusion of ideas and images and words that seem to reject all constraints, that reject anything that would seem to be poetic tradition. But he does it all in very tight, organized lines. It's remarkable. It is it would be only too easy for someone to read this stuff and say, well, this guy's just writing junk. This is no poet. He doesn't know what he's doing. But the form won't let him. Well, the form won't let the reader discard him like that. So he knows how to appeal on these lines. And maybe the idea is that, well, these ideas, these images were always inherent in the language anyway. And we were always just sort of, politely polishing them away. But they're there. And they have every right to be there in his argument. Significantly, he dwells on sound and smell and all of these sensory experiences beyond just the sight, because psychologists, some critics will tell you that the sight is the most intellectual of the five senses, but the smell and taste and hearing, these are the more emotional reactions, the more automatic reactions that we have. So we can intellectualize, we can idealize, we can objectify what we see, but something we smell will revolt us. Something we hear can frighten us. Something we taste can stimulate us. These are the senses that he likes to work in, and so you see repeated references to smell. Each day, his flattery makes us eat a toad, and each step forward is a step to hell, unmoved, though previous corpses and their smell asphyxiate our progress on this road. This is the devil from the previous stanza that he's talking about, but again, he's talking in terms of smell and asphyxiation and a stench, not a pretty smell, but something that creates a shock, that creates a reaction, that doesn't just leave you saying, oh, well, that's nice, that's polite, that's a simple, easy smell that I can experience without really getting any jolt from. It's not a disturbing smell. I can experience it without it actually moving me in the slightest. That's what he wants to get away from. But he just keeps firing all of this ugliness in the face at the reader. If poison, arson, sex, narcotics, knives have not yet ruined us and stitched their quick, loud patterns on the canvas of our lives, it is because our souls are still too sick. Among the vermin, jackals, panthers, lice, gorillas, and tarantulas that suck and snatch and scratch and defecate and I'm not going to say that out loud, but it rhymes with suck, in the disorderly circus of our vice, there's one more ugly and abortive birth. It makes no gestures, never beats its breast, yet it would murder for a moment's rest and willingly annihilate the earth. It's boredom. Tears have glued its eyes together. You know it well, my reader. This obscene beast chain smokes, yawning from the guillotine. You, hypocrite reader, my double, my brother. Well, obviously, more words you can't say in poetry, or can you? More images that are just quite horrifying, but then at the very end, he builds this again and again and again, hoping, it seems, to offend the reader so much that he just closes the book and walks away. Oh, I'm not going to read this. But if the reader gets to that last stanza, he is told, or she is told, that it is boredom that is worse than all. And as offended as the reader may be, by this point in, or about 35 lines into the poem, why are you still reading? Why have you continued? He wasn't pulling any punches before. He wasn't sugarcoating anything. Maybe the reader is curious. Maybe the reader is intrigued. Maybe the reader, for all the huffing and puffing about, oh, this is offensive, maybe the reader wants to see the dark stuff. Maybe he wants to see the nasty stuff. Maybe there's some curiosity in him that draws to the vile, to the grotesque. You can pretend that you are polite, and you can pretend that you are offended. But still, you've read to the end. You can't pretend anymore. Maybe no one's watching. Maybe you can hide the title of the cover as you read. But your lurid curiosity has dragged you here. You hypocrite reader, my double, my brother, my double, my brother. So it's not just you are passively judging the writer. It's that you, reader, are involved because you are bringing your own salacious interest to the process. You are leaning in and saying, oh yeah, that's disgusting. So you are the author's double. You are sharing this mission of creating poetry. You are linked, whether you like it or not. So once again, you have that image, that unavoidable duality of good and evil, inseparable.